Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Your Time
Your
You're Wasting
time you're
with me.
wasting.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go. You do it.
Your time
Yeah,
you're
with
wasting.
me, David Didow, and the ever-interrupting Martin Robinson. So, Martin, I
Yes.
just need to get this off my chest. Yes, I just need to get this off my chest before we crack on with our school uniform discussion. In our last episode on AI, we made a gaffe. We said that Pete Seeger was responsible for a song that he was in fact not
That's correct.
responsible for.
Yes.
Yeah, what happened there?
I don't know. I think it's probably me sort of getting muddled up because Peggy Seeger was on the song as well. So I probably,
Right.
if it was my fault, I can't quite recall. But
Yeah, I can.
talking, it was.
I know, and I just accepted it like, oh yeah, okay, good. And then we had a whole discussion about Edward Norton,
It was
completely and utterly irrelevant.
and Bob Dylan.
Anyway, it turns out that it's
Ewan
by Ewan
McCall.
McCall.
Ewan
Yeah,
McCall. Yeah,
Ewan
which I
McCall.
did know.
When Peg... It's easy to say in hindsight. Yeah, but you're right. You're saying apparently, and I've been listening to it now as a result.
It's
And he
great.
sang it with Peggy Seeger, who I first assumed was Pete's daughter, but no, it's his sister.
There you go. You see.
Did you know that?
I think I knew that.
No, okay,
I think I
didn't.
knew that.
My Seeger knowledge is very limited.
I don't know if it's very difficult to remember whether you know something sometimes
Yeah.
or whether you didn't know it. I mean, now that I
always
know
get
it.
Yeah, no. Anyway. So, Martin, today we're talking about school uniform. Two words that manage to aerate people or align them in equal measure.
It depends on the uniform, what it's made out of, if it's going to aerate you, of course.
Yeah, it's probably not
Cotton
what I meant,
or
is it?
nylon or
A bit of Airtex.
Airtex.
So, yeah, we're buttoning up, Martin. We're tucking in. I know.
I
we're
like
pulling
you'd be
apart.
working on that. Don't forget to subscribe, by the way. Subscribe, follow, like, all those things on YouTube and on all the other podcast channels that
all
this
of
goes
those
out
things.
on.
So, Martin, it is a really interesting thing because I think we are an outlier in the UK. Everyone, I think it's 90% of schools and 99% of secondary schools have a school uniform in the UK. So why, and that is not obviously the case internationally. So, you know, there's a long tradition. I think for some people it might conjure up Etonian tailcoats or Harrovian straw boaters. But for many of us, obviously, it's more Asda sweatshirts and that kind of thing. So, what do we think? And then we're going to start with you. You've got a Daily Mail story for us.
Oh, yes, it's you could call this a Daily Mail scoop, I suppose, but it came originally, I think, from the Colchester Press somewhere along the line. But Honeywood School in Essex is set to, according to the Daily Mail, ban skirts in block capitals and bold and everything else. What it transpires is it's a uniform change to long trousers or shorts, and that is the choice that pupils will have to wear. The head teacher is disappointed that some families felt it was a topic that should be discussed in the media before it was discussed in the school.
Do you know what, Martin? Those families, they've not just let themselves down. They've let the whole school down, haven't they?
I'm not going to comment. They might be watching this very episode. You never know.
Well, have a word with yourselves. I mean, it's an interesting. So what's the issue there, Martin? Is it what's the? It's long trousers or shorts seems like a reasonable.
It's. I think
compromise?
what triggers the Daily Mail is the idea of taking gender.
It's a culture war wedge issue.
I think so because shorts aren't skirts. You know what I mean? And skirts.
They are not. How about skirts?
And I think the frightening thing for the Daily Mail might be that this is a reaction to perhaps trans pupils or something like that. I don't know. It might be
No.
that. There's I think some issue over time, according to some of the parents, that some of the girls have been rolling up their skirts, so the skirt
That
length,
old chestnut.
Yeah.
Yes, they've been doing that for as long as
As
school
long as
skirts
skirts
have
have
been a
been long.
uniform. Yeah, yes, exactly. I remember girls being told off when I was at school about the length of their
You
skirts.
mean when you were a pupil at school?
Yes, I do
Yeah.
mean that.
Gosh.
Yeah, and there was one of our heads of year, I think she was called Mrs. Sexton,
Yeah.
who would measure girls' skirt length, and it had to be a specified number of inches above the knee.
Above the knee. The knee is the measure, isn't it? So below the
And the
knee,
knees,
above the knee, and distance above. There used to be as well a school I worked in that if you knelt down, it was a Catholic
yeah.
school, a Catholic school.
Wow, a lot of kneeling.
So if you kneel down and your skirt is under your knees, then that's okay. But if it didn't touch the floor, so to speak, it's no good.
If it didn't touch the, oh, okay, I see what you. When you're kneeling, not
Yeah,
not
yeah,
like
yeah,
a
yeah,
long.
yeah. Not when you
No,
not when you're stood up. That
goodness.
takes away the point.
Yeah, with your
That would be
corset. And, yeah.
that's maximum length. Anyway,
Anyway. So yeah, so school uniforms. Let's go. Let's deal with this in a sort of pro con version. Let's think of the arguments in favour of school uniforms first. So I think one of the cases that's often made is that it promotes equality and that it reduces distractions. That uniforms, I think the argument goes, is that they mask socioeconomic differences and therefore reduce peer pressure and any issues related to bullying around what children wear. What do you think of that, Martin? Does that
well,
sound plausible?
yeah, I think let's go with the socio-economic differences.
Yeah.
For a start,
Mm.
this is this trying to hide poverty somewhere along the line, that poverty is something to be ashamed of, and we should not expose people who are poor to their poverty, or for other pupils to realize that people in their school might be poor? Or is it about the rich and making sure that they don't come in dressed, draped in jewelry and their finery and ermine?
Purple togas.
Whatever else the rich wear. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm so far away from that, clearly. But it seems odd that people think uniform actually does that. From my experience, uniform doesn't hide socioeconomic difference. You can tell somebody who's got a freshly crisp uniform and someone who's had hand-me-downs, down a few generations or certainly years, shall we say. And the general sort of sense of it is that kids will be fooled into thinking, why do we want to not hide some sort of socio-economic difference? Why
Yeah, they should be exposed and ridiculed, shouldn't you? Those poor kids.
No, I think kids get ridiculed anyway, depending on the culture of the school. I mean,
right. Well, let me. Yeah. Okay.
Which car do you get picked up in? If you get picked up in a car, do you have to walk? Have you got a bicycle? Do you take the bus? Do you go in that direction or that direction towards the estate? What happens in schools? Like, the uniform will cover all those differences. It doesn't.
Well, it isn't just a marker for socioeconomics, is it? It's also a marker for other things, like the amount of pride your parents might take in your appearance, and you yourself might take in your appearance. These sorts of things, and the extent to which they're subverted as well, I think is really important. When I, again, as a pupil in the school, for whatever reason, I can't quite recall the logic, it was really important to only have the thin bit of your tie showing. So we'd tie it in such a way that the fat bit was kind of hidden with a long, thin piece of tie visible. And that anyone who didn't do that it's not that we thought they were, poor or anything, just that they were not cool.
And there's also all the things you do with ties. I mean, ties are a ridiculous part of it. So when I was at school, it was the opposite: the biggest knot possible,
Right, right. Yeah, yeah,
and the shortest amount of tie on
yeah.
display, and then underneath that
I've
was
seen
what.
that more recently. The
Yeah,
short fat
okay, that's
tie.
come back, has
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
And but also people would tug your tie and make it
yeah.
so you had that really tight knot.
Yes.
What was that called? That had a name.
Did it?
I can't
Being a
remember.
bastard?
Yeah, that's it. And but now don't the people have clip-ons? I mean, most extraordinary things.
Some places have clip-ons. Yeah,
Is
some
that I
places do.
don't what's that for? Is that to stop
Well,
to stop these sort of violence
it
happening, or
prevents the strangulation,
the strangulation of children?
and I
So
think
why
maybe
have
it's
ties? Why have ties?
what well ties are a really interesting uh, thing, aren't they? Because certainly as a male teacher, I feel under pressure in a school to wear a tie. It feels like a real statement to be a male teacher not wearing a tie, particularly in some schools. I don't know if you're a drama teacher, so you're
Yeah,
probably
I was
there's
there
lower standards expected, aren't there?
no
You're probably wearing a
standards.
velvet jacket,
I could be in costume.
yeah, or a fez, probably.
Today I am Hamlet or Tommy Cooper
Yeah,
or whatever. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, no, the tie is an odd one when it's also you talk about gender differences. Some schools, of course, the tie is worn by girls and
Most,
boys.
yeah. So I think if I might be wrong on this. My memory tells me that when I was at school, the girls didn't have ties. I think it was just the boys. They had
Right,
open neck
right.
shirts.
Yeah, so
I
blouses.
might have invented that.
So girls with blouses and
Yeah,
boys with shirts. And the
boys with
top button, the big argument about whether to have your top button done up or not. I
which is
mean,
a which is a, I've got a bit of a fat neck, Martin.
no, really? Can you show
But
it to me?
yeah,
Do
I have.
you want to?
It's always been. I know. It's always been. So it's 17. I've got a 17 and a half inch neck, which is a
Which
lot of
direction?
neck.
In which
Yeah.
direction?
Yeah, right. and that means that if I buy a shirt, unless I went for bespoke tailoring, which I'm not really in the market for, but when I buy a shirt, it's either ridiculously big but comfortable around the neck, or it fits and then it's really tight around the neck. So I tend to go that route, which means that it's quite uncomfortable to do the top button up. It's quite constraining. And so I don't. And what I tend to do when I'm dressing up for school is I'll have quite a fat knot like your schoolboy self.
Oh, I see. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, and I will have that quite high up to disguise the fact that I've loosely left my top button under. But I did
What you
for
need, by the way, is a
pardon?
cravat.
Yeah, is it? I don't.
I
I mean,
think
it's all
so.
right for you drama teachers. I don't know about that. I don't think I could rock a cravat. Maybe a cravette.
Isn't that an old Vauxhall car?
No, it's a prawn, I think.
What? I'm thinking of a Corvette. It's all right.
You're thinking of a carafe, maybe.
No, a carafe, another one. Oh, not now. Thank you.
Um,
Come back
yeah.
onto the
So
topic. Come on.
anyway, listen. I worked in one school where the rule was very, very strict, top button, and I felt really obliged, especially as I was part of the SLT. I had to do my top button up, and I really hated it.
Yeah.
And I'd spend my life, kids walking towards me, and I'm doing this to them, and they'd go, and they'd do their top button up, and then walk past, and then the next time you see them, guess what?
Well, of course, isn't it? I mean, you talk about distractions here, but isn't there some
Yeah,
along the line a discipline distraction that actually it keeps kids occupied in their revolution? The revolution is
yeah.
focused on uniform rather than on more
Hmm. Well, and I think that
revolutionary
to an
activities.
extent, that's deliberate, isn't it? That
Hmm.
if the rules you're kicking back on are at the level of is your shirt tucked in and your top button done up instead of am I allowed to like throw chairs around, then
Because you can't
then
do both.
obviously not. Um, yeah. But look, I wanted to go back a moment and talk about the socioeconomic thing because I became aware a few years ago of the fact that non-uniform days are a particularly difficult topic for some children, and there are it's a well-known thing that there are children who just do not attend on non-uniform days because the fear of having to go to school in something other than your school uniform is so sharp that they'd rather not go through that gauntlet.
Yeah.
And for me, I think one of the best arguments for school uniform is that you're absolutely right that it doesn't hide these social decisions, but it does give you an easily available, this is the uniform, and yes, yours is nicely, better washed and better ironed than mine, but we are kind of similar, and we're doing something, and I don't stand out as much as the,
Yeah, it's still an odd one in that the
and I
rest of
think there
our
was some,
society, we're not exactly a society that wants everyone to be similar, except in school for some reason. I don't know what the thinking is behind that, but certainly I get the point. From a parental point of view, it's so much easier
yeah,
when your child has
yeah,
just one set of clothes to wear and they don't have to choose anything in particular,
yeah.
to go through that whole wardrobe hell that you can get, what am I
That's
going to wear today?
apparently Einstein did this, Martin. He'd
Did
have
he?
a wardrobe full of identical suits, and so he would get dressed in the morning, and he never had to expend any mental energy on what he was going to wear.
Hmm.
Unlike you and I, who spend a disproportionate amount of time sort of thinking about our sartorial expression.
What's on top of the pile is mine. Yeah.
What doesn't smell too bad?
Well, I couldn't possibly comment. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So there is the lack of. I mean, was it Mao? It's a Maoist approach, isn't it? Everyone wear a
Hmm.
boiler suit. I mean, I think
Yeah.
Churchill did during the war, didn't he? He wore a boiler suit
Did
to be
he?
down
I
with the
didn't know that.
workers, down
Right.
with the
Okay.
soldiers, and things like that.
I can't remember. It must have been quite snug.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I mean, yeah, okay. Well, so the other argument, I think, and this is a slightly different one, is that it's one of safety and identity. So everyone's wearing a uniform. It's very easy at a glance to see whether there's an interloper, and it also
Well,
creates arguably a sense of community and belonging. Can instill pride and unity and that kind of thing. What do you think of those arguments?
yeah, I don't. It depends if you're proud of the school, but as you say, you know,
Well, yeah, yes,
because
it
you
does.
can't. Like we go back over that. People use it as the first focus of their lack of pride in the school, perhaps.
Yeah.
But as for the interloper thing, what's the thinking behind that? Because I've got a story to tell on that.
Please do tell the story.
Um, that we had in the school I was working in, we had a open evening for sixth form, so people came from far and wide as they did, and looked around the school. In this case, two people were casing the joint, so to speak. And the next day they came in school uniform
Wow.
and nicked some computers. They weren't they
Brilliant.
weren't challenged because they were in the
How old were they?
uniform of the school. They were about 15, 16. They'd done the
Oh,
sixth form
right.
thing. So they took a day off from their school the next day.
Brilliant.
Just put a blazer on with the school
Yeah.
badge, which they might have nicked the day before. I don't know when they did the casing the joint. And
Mm.
there they were. No one picked them up because it's a big school. People just look,
Yeah.
oh, there's a badge child, keep going, keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Off you
Yeah.
go to the computer room.
Yeah. Chop chop.
And then they,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so
Bold
it,
as brass, Martin.
yeah, but a very clever way of being
Yeah.
unseen
Yeah.
because they're wearing a
Yes.
uniform,
Yeah. No. Good point.
the
I
right
think one of
uniform.
the arguments would be not so much in school, but also on things like school trips. You can easily see, oh, that's one of ours.
Yes, that's right.
Uh,
Falling off the, pushing someone off, or they're doing
yeah.
naughty
Yeah.
things.
Oh God.
And school buses or buses that are shared, they
Mm.
can certainly become
They can identify
they can
who the
identify in their
miscreants
gang.
are more easily. Yeah.
And
And schools often get sort of complaints or notifications from the community going, some of your children were smoking, or they
worse.
very kindly helped a old lady who'd fallen over and we'd like to congratulate you or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they can be also, you can self identify with your crew, so to speak, on the bus when there's trouble. because
Ah,
because your school is
sounds like your voice of
socioeconomically
experience here,
identified.
Martin.
Huh?
Did you get into ruckus with opposing school
Well,
students?
interestingly, the because I walked to school a lot of the time, and it was in the rural area I lived. So you just had one school. We didn't have much of that.
Right.
But in the school I was at before then, we
Yeah.
used to have a whole bus to our bus. We had 4 buses going from where we were to
Yeah.
you know Oxford, don't you? We're going to Botley
I do.
from
Botley.
Botley, yeah. So we're going to Botley
Yeah.
to Matthew Arnold
Bottler.
School. I remember this, and I
I
was
I taught at Matthew Arnold
there. You
School.
go. You see, you
Yeah.
might have taught me, and
Probably.
in year 7, uh, there I
It was
was.
long before year 7, wasn't it, Martin?
But we had the third bus was number 3, so there were 2 mixed buses, a girls' bus and a boys' bus, and bus number 3 was a boys' bus, and I caught the boys' bus.
Oh, boys,
And then
boys.
we'd
Wow.
have every now and then, this is slightly off topic, we'd have a driver who didn't know the way, so we'd tell him the way. And so off we went to Gosford Hill School in Kidlington. All got off the bus. Anyway,
Brilliant. Okay. Wow. Boys, brother. So yeah. So I went to school. I used to have to get 2 buses to
yeah,
school. So I'd get a bus to Hales Owen, and then be picked up there by the school bus. And so part of my journey to school was on public transport, and
right,
partly on the school bus. And I went to my school's Catholic school, and we were all bussed in from, all the Catholics bussed into the
yeah,
Catholic school, and over the road was a non-Catholic school in the sort of leafy area where the school was based, and in our view, they were the posh kids,
there
and
you go.
it'd be really interesting. We'd have these jungle drums sort of go around the school, like, oh, there's a fight tonight with school
Mm.
over the road, and we'd all sort of congregate on a patch of grassland, and nobody would turn up. Just, I'm sure
Apart
people
from the
eventually.
crowd.
Yeah, but nothing ever happened.
Yeah,
There
well,
was always this. Oh, we're going to fight with the. Nothing happened in the whole time. No, I never remember an actual ruck.
no,
I think that's what you call it, isn't it?
it's a great shame.
Anyway, we really
No,
have
we
gone
did go off topic, but there's one thing there about
ridiculously.
socioeconomic identification with uniform is when you are the school that is the poor school,
Yeah,
or the Catholic school, or there's some
yeah,
identification by other schools in a way when you're there. Oh, you're from that school. We think you're
yeah.
whatever, and so there is, it doesn't hide socioeconomic
Mm,
differences. But anyway,
no,
carry on.
no. Okay, well, shall we? Let's look at some of the arguments against uniforms, shall we? I think the biggest one is probably the cost of them.
Hmm.
That some schools have been accused of selection by uniform, that they make their uniforms quite expensive, with ornate, special blazers that have to be bought from special shops and all sorts of things, and that means that certain families are less likely to apply to send their children there, perhaps.
Yeah.
So,
So,
so
and
there's
is
that
that
argument.
deliberate? Is that
Well,
deliberate? Yeah.
what do you think?
I think it could be, couldn't it? It could, or it could be unintended consequence, shall we say, to
Yeah,
give them the benefit of the doubt. But certainly, when you get to branded items of PE kit,
mm,
and
yeah,
you've got to have this for tennis, this for football,
yeah.
this for that, this
This
for
for
that.
lacrosse.
Yeah, and all those things, and then you start saying, "Well, do you really need all
Yeah,
that?" Because then
you
you are
don't
going,
really.
and then you've got house uniform as well, potentially on top of that, which is, you've got to
Yeah,
have green because that's your house colour for inter-house sports and all this sort of nonsense which
yeah.
comes in. You can see how.
You're calling it nonsense, Martin. I'm sort of sensing your antipathy to this argument.
Do you think I'm showing my bias?
A little bit.
You could just have a little badge with your house name on it, couldn't you? And that'll do.
Yeah.
But but
Or a
when
paper hat.
or a bib, if you
Yeah,
need to
bib.
change the colours,
Bib.
or
Yeah.
something like that.
No, you're absolutely right. Do you know, Martin, there was an article in that the Guardian published, I remember reading, I think it was late last year, where they said that the average price of school uniform per pupil for secondary schools was 422 quid a year.
Yeah, yeah,
It's quite a lot.
yeah,
Average. That would obviously imply there are some schools where it's significantly more and obviously some where it's
yeah,
less. But 422 seems a lot.
yeah. And I think certainly from what I have seen, a lot of
Mm.
private schools do go into quite excessive uniforms,
Yeah, yeah,
and as though that's another level of trying to discriminate against certain parents. Perhaps I don't know, but
I think so.
we have, and the lacrosse uniform
Yeah,
comes into sight. So I think where there is a certain snobbery, or for
yeah,
whatever purpose it is that a school would have so much branded stuff it
mm,
wants people to buy, and then recommended shops, and
right.
then on top of that you can't have the non-branded item, or it's
Yeah,
just slightly the wrong color of charcoal gray, and therefore you can't wear that, and you get
yeah.
into very, very difficult things. But the government actually is kicking out against this now, I think.
They are. Bridget Phillipson's pretty keen that there's really going to be some strict guidance on how much uniform should cost.
Yeah.
And
And
it's always been the case, I think, that some schools have really, really reflect on the fact that uniforms are hard for some of their families to afford, and some schools will give uniform, especially to students in receipt of pupil premium, which sounds really great. I really like the fact that lots of schools in more deprived areas will have things like, well, or the only thing that they have to buy other than from Asda is a iron-on badge.
yeah, things like
I
that.
think things like that seem a good way around those problems if we come to the conclusion that the uniform's a good idea.
Of
What do
course,
you
we've
make,
also
Mark?
got, hang on, we've got
Oh,
there
sorry,
a thing
sorry.
about local shops as well that sell the
Yeah,
uniform, that have done for years. There's
yeah,
this shop that just sells school uniform for the local schools around the area. And now if you're all going off to George at Asda or
yeah.
whatever, those little shops are going to close down. Centuries of
Well,
business, selling
yeah.
Christ's Hospital uniform
It's a tough
or
one, that, isn't it? Because you're right. The I'm sure somebody will get in touch to say that Georgia Asda is very ethical, but when you're buying school trousers for £3, you can't help but think it probably isn't.
yeah. And where was it made? And
Yeah,
is it
exactly.
a slave sweatshop somewhere? Or
Doubtless. Yeah. And all of those
hey,
little.
folks, we couldn't possibly comment on that
No, we
because
couldn't.
no.
But and neither do we know whether these little shops that sell uniforms, are they all hand sewn by virgins? Who knows? But
I don't know where
so
you're going with that one. Anyway, let's move
no, I
hurriedly on.
don't either. I don't either. So one of the other arguments against is that it crushes individuality and prevents youngsters from being able to express themselves. What do we think of that argument?
Yeah, I think this also comes into hair and makeup and
Yeah,
jewelry as well. So
yeah,
it goes just beyond uniform into dress codes,
yeah,
into what you're asking and suggesting pupils do with their whole look.
yes,
Now, when you're a teenager, sometimes the argument is that you want to perhaps
Hmm.
rebel somewhat.
I've heard that. Bit of a
Yeah, apparently
cliche.
so. And you might want to wear your hair, change your hair color, have very short hair. I think a lot of schools bulk against that, certainly for white boys,
Yeah.
and other sort of
Hmm.
hairstyles often get called racist if you call against certain other styles of hair.
Yeah.
Um,
Some schools have definitely got into trouble with that, haven't they?
and makeup, you've got too much makeup, but then we get into the idea, well, what is right and wrong with makeup?
Yeah.
That makeup that we can't notice is the strangest one of all. You're wearing makeup as long as I don't notice you're wearing makeup. That sort of.
Yeah.
So would J.D. Vance, a well-known wearer of mascara, would he
Yes.
count as not wearing
Yeah.
makeup that you would notice? Eyeliner,
I don't know. Would you?
mascara,
Would he? Yeah. I don't.
eyeliner. I think. Anyway.
I like. What? Yes. Probably a little bit of mascara too. Maybe some blusher.
We ought to have a look. We ought to have a look.
Yeah. No, listen. Okay, so we're let's let's think about the two things. So we've got the whole dress code thing, and we've got uniform as well. So with dress code, I do think some schools really make a rod for their own back with haircuts. And the advice that I would give is when we're thinking about things like dress code rules is, how much do you care? If a child comes in with a skin fade, is that the thing that you want to? Is that the hill you want to die on? Do you really need? Because if you've published this isn't allowed. If you come in with this haircut, we're going to, you know, exclude you until suspend you until it's regrown. Then you have to do it. Not doing it
Yeah,
obviously makes you look ridiculous. But you have to do it, and then you're in this position where you're having parents go, "It's bloody ridiculous," and getting in touch with the Daily Mail, and
it's always the Daily Mail.
It's always the Daily Mail.
And the other word is fashion cuts that some schools use. What's a fashion
are those,
cut?
Martin?
What I've got.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter what your hair is like as long as it's not fashionable.
Yeah, that's somewhere along the line. That's somewhere what the people think about school uniforms. As long as they're unfashionable.
Yeah. Well, but they do go in fashions, don't they? School uniforms.
Yeah, but generally we don't want kids to wear fashion items, even on non-uniform days. You see that sometimes it's argued, please don't wear fashion items or whatever, or go too excessive or what. But.
Yeah. So let's So
but self-expression, yeah.
Self-expression. So we were just talking earlier about the way we rocked our ties. I think the extent to which children choose to subvert their uniform is quite an interesting canvas for self-expression. That you can visit a school and you can pick up pretty quickly signals about the personality of a student from the way they're presenting their school uniform. If they've got their shirt untucked, if they've got their top button undone and their tie sort of hanging
askew
around their neck loosely and askew, or whether they've got their blazer smartly sort of done up with badges, with their prefects and library assistant sort of affiliations on show.
We're building characters in my mind here. This is a novel.
We are.
Novel being made in front of me here. Jennings and Derbyshire and somebody else.
It writes itself, Martin. Yeah. So, but you'll often see a certain sort of student. They sort of turn up the collar of their blazer in order to signify their coolness and that kind of thing. So, I don't know. I think there's plenty of scope with uniforms to show who you are.
I think there's also, you can take it to extremes. I remember when I was at school I got into sixth form. I didn't last too long, by the way, in sixth form. But I was...
Story for another day.
They brought in uniform for sixth form. And ours was the first year to have uniform for sixth form.
Right.
And much gnashing of teeth and wailing was to be had. And one day I didn't wear my tie. So they told me off and told me the next day I had to come in with my tie. So I came in with my tie, but no shirt the next day. I was sent home, But, I'd done exactly what they said.
Yeah. Yes, I had a similar thing, actually. At my school, we had a choice of shirts. We could wear a pale blue shirt, a white shirt, or a cream shirt. And one day I decided to wear a shirt which was a combination of those colours, a striped shirt, and tried to justify that I was within the limits of the uniform policy.
Where did you get a shirt that had that mix, or did you sew it together yourself? I mean,
it was the 80s. Who knows? But I found this shirt. It was a short sleeve shirt, striped with these three colours.
Okay.
And I was sent home as well.
You see,
I remember as well the
poachers and gamekeepers here.
Quite the absolute focus for resistance was socks at my schools. For some reason, everybody wanted to wear white terry toweling socks. But if you were caught doing so, you were in a lot of trouble. And I don't know why we have this cat and mouse about our white socks. But obviously, white socks highly visible from a distance. So you would try and wear your make sure your trousers were covering them at appropriate moments so that nobody noticed. There's a huge row if you were caught with them.
And
Why did they
shoes,
care?
shoes.
Why did they care about socks? Why do we care about top buttons? Why do we care about all of these things? Which takes us to the haircuts thing.
Yeah,
That if you have these strict rules, you have to follow them up. Do you need them?
yeah. Shoes are another one. I remember
Mm.
wearing DMs.
Trainers.
Well, trainers now, black trainers, or some trainers now are almost
Yeah.
shoe-like, and some shoes are almost trainer-like. I mean, it must be a nightmare to know where to draw the line, on these
But
things. DMs I used to wear and get told off and sent home for wearing DMs, and now they're a
yeah,
big fashion item now. In those days, they were associated with bother boys, I suppose, but
right. Which I'm sure you were.
clearly not. Clearly not.
No. So, okay, so we've got all of that. We've also got, Martin, maybe the argument of comfort and practicality. We've talked about ties already as very silly. Um, are they comfortable? Are they impractical? I guess it depends on the uniform, doesn't it? If you're wearing an Etonian top coat,
But a
not
tone
very
and colour
practical.
as well, yeah, and all that.
Yeah, exactly. That
Um,
strikes me as I've not worn one, but I can imagine it's not a lot of fun to wear.
but
And
isn't
if you're
that part
wearing
of
a
the point?
sweatshirt and an Airtex, that
You
seems
want
pretty.
children to feel uncomfortable, because they're at school. They're meant to feel uncomfortable at school. This is the whole point.
I see.
I don't. Yeah, it's interesting when it comes to practicality, because ties have a certain amount of practicality in drama lessons. Kids would go in and
Oh,
then tie them round their heads.
yeah.
What is that
Okay.
about? But anyway, they do that. There's some sort of hooray! I don't have to wear the tie here. I can wear it here, and now I'm in character. As somebody who wears a tie around their head.
I
But
see.
yeah, but I don't know how comfortable a uniform should be. Should it? For what purpose is that comfort? Because there's different levels of comfort. There's the idea of sitting in a school classroom all day long is very different to
Mm.
clambering up trees, running around in the playground, playing football. How adaptable a uniform should actually be.
Yeah, yeah, you're right, and also the idea of little primary school kids in blazers seems silly to me. I don't know whether it does to anyone else, but that does seem a bit silly. And there's also you sent me a report from the Youth Sport Trust
Mm.
and publishing guidelines about uniforms that work with children's lives, and there's a really interesting idea there of international comparison, which looks at the idea that in countries where children don't wear school uniforms, they exercise more. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I sent it to you.
Yeah. All right.
Well, he just did point that out, so I better.
I don't know if
I
you've read it,
don't need
Martin.
to underline that. Yeah, but yeah. So, but the correlation, etc.,
Yeah,
always.
sure, of
But
course.
there could be something in that. But it could be that the type of society, it doesn't want kids to wear school uniforms, which is most of the world, as we'd already said.
Yeah.
Doesn't has a more outdoorish attitude towards things. I don't know. Also, kids. I mean, certainly, I think there's a difference here between boys and girls as well.
Right.
And
I was
girl
going to say,
exercising
yeah.
in this country is certainly on the decrease from what I've read. Boys perhaps too, but boys would always, as far as I remember, quite happy to take their jumpers off, make goalposts, and
Jumpers for
kick a ball around.
goalposts.
Yeah, and all
Yeah.
that. And just whether their attitude towards uniform is slightly more lackadaisical than perhaps girls used to be or are. I
Yeah.
couldn't possibly
Well,
comment
that's
for all
certainly
girls and all
something that's
boys.
brought up by Youth Sport Trust and Play Scotland. We'll put links to these in the show notes, but there's the idea that this does affect girls more than boys. The girls are more restricted by school uniform often.
But they often have, number one, they have a more restricted uniform. And this goes
Yeah,
back to the
yeah.
skirts thing. And skirts, tights, blouses, blazers,
Mm.
sometimes ties, hair ties, colour of hair ties, length of hair, you know, and all these other things that then goes with that. But length of skirt, makeup, jewelry.
Makeup and jewelry. Yeah.
Talking of jewelry, boys and girls, the idea in the school I worked in that boys who had one earring
Right.
or two earrings or whatever had to cover them up with bit of plaster,
Did they?
elastoplast. Yeah, so they had to
Why?
wear this on their ear to cover their stud because they weren't allowed to wear it. So they put
Right.
studs in and they tried to think of a compromise of how to. So they had to
Do
hide.
you remember the whole which stud you had your single ear pierced was hugely significant, and if you got the wrong ear pierced, it meant that you were signalling something about your sexuality. Do
Yeah,
you remember all that?
I'm sure there are lots of signals going on with various piercings these days, which are
Oh,
beyond,
yeah,
you know.
for sure.
But
Probably.
the limiting of piercings, going back
Yeah,
to all these other things as well, and then hooped, and the idea
yeah.
that hoops could get ripped out if you're taking a part in PE or whatever.
Which that's sensible, for
Yeah,
sure. Take your hoops out if you're doing
yeah.
a PE lesson.
There's
I don't think
also
anyone.
differences with religion as well, and
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
multicultural society,
yeah,
do we worry about such things? The idea of
yeah.
uniformity in a
The
multicultural
French don't, do
society.
they?
Well, they're more into uniformity in the sense that you can't wear certain things, but they're, from what I see on French trips over here, they're less concerned about school uniform.
Yeah,
But
well, sure. Yeah, very rare.
over here we have adaptations to different religious sensitivities and requirements.
Yes, and
Certainly noticeable.
again, there's the potential there for that to be a wedge issue with certain people, isn't there? That
Yeah,
why
yeah.
should we have to make adaptations for people we don't like? That kind of
Yeah, and if you
approach.
want uniformity, I mean, how far do you want to push uniformity? Do you want everyone to wear exactly the same, or do you want to allow adaptation? Now, we have this, I think most people allow adaptation and, prefer that in our schools, in our society,
Yeah,
but they do want uniformity as well. So it is certainly interesting uniformity in a multicultural, multi-gendered society, as well as we're going back to perhaps restricting who should wear skirts and who shouldn't. Because if you're a trans student, do you wear a skirt? If you are fluid, do you wear a skirt one
yeah,
day, trousers the other day, etc., etc.? How far can uniform policies adapt to all these different things that students perhaps are wanting to express and perhaps protest, um, and say these are our rights. We have rights to express ourselves in certain ways.
yeah. Have you ever come across or been, at a school where the students have organised a protest about uniform?
No,
All right, okay.
I just did. I
Me
just did my
neither.
own lonely wearing no shirt
Ah,
protest.
your no shirt reminds me of an incident at the school I worked at where year 10 were told, right, tomorrow it's like a business day, and people are going to come in and interview you, and it's work related learning and blah, yada yada yada. And the instruction to them was make sure you come in dressed up.
Right.
So they all came in their, suited and booted, nice, all the rest of it. One lad turns up in a rabbit costume. And, uh, his excuse being, I've come dressed up.
Brilliant. I'm with
Brilliant.
him.
I know. And he was exactly, it wasn't a mistake. He knew what he was doing.
Of course.
Legendary, obviously, lots of people fuming.
How did he get on with his job interview?
He was sent home, so he
Oh
didn't have to do
no!
it. Yeah, of
Sent home
course.
with a carrot.
Sent, yeah, with his tail between his legs,
Yeah,
Martin.
very good, very good. Oh, I wish
I
I'd thought of that.
know.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I bet you do. So anyway, look, we've injected this conversation with our bias and prejudices and anecdotes. What does the evidence say? Have you looked at any of this? Have you looked at what the EEF say about the evidence on school uniform?
You tell me.
Well, I think the TLDR doesn't really have any impact on academics or behaviour or attendance. There's
Hang on. So you're telling me that as far as they know, I mean, have they got control? How do they do this? Have they got control groups, etc., etc.?
Wow.
How would you even, if the
I
majority of
haven't
schools in this country?
rigorously, yeah, I haven't rigorously sort of combed through to look at how, the methodology of lots of different studies. But on the EEF toolkit, which is their headline, where they kind of summarize and distill the research, they essentially say it has no impact.
I think common sense would agree with this in
Yeah,
terms of, I've worked in schools with school uniform where discipline is brilliant and others where
yeah,
discipline is appalling.
yeah,
And you see also on school buses or outside of schools, to and from
yeah.
schools, you see some kids in school uniform behaving impeccably and some schools kids behaving
Abominably.
abominably.
Yeah, yeah.
It does seem to have a certain common sense rig to it that but
And if there was really, really strong evidence on this, you'd expect it to have more impact internationally, wouldn't you? That if wearing a school uniform really did have an evidence base showing how it improved all of these outcomes, why wouldn't other countries go, yep, let's get them in ties?
some schools do. I think certainly private schools in some countries who follow the English
Oh,
model,
yeah, yeah.
certainly that is part of their
But that's more
cachet.
of the esprit de corps, isn't
Oh, there
it?
we go.
Than,
We're using French now. I said cachet.
oh,
You use esprit
yeah,
de
I
corps.
know.
You know.
We've got to
We,
raise our standards, Martin. Yeah.
so the
So,
evidence is not clear, or
no,
certainly
well,
not
I think the evidence is pretty clear
so
that there are
clearly
some
not.
people who
Okay.
argue that there are tiny gains with things like behaviour and attendance when associated with other policies, but not enough to justify any kind of blanket. This is what everybody should do. So that if you have a uniform policy, and as we've said, pretty much every school in the UK does, it's not going to improve anything. You're doing it for some other reason, and being honest about that is probably a good thing. I did find, Martin, I thought you'd like this. I found that a study by Adam and Galinsky, which said they were talking about the idea. Have you come across enclothed? Sorry, I'm going to try again. Enclothed cognition.
Certainly not.
No. So their research looks at the fact that wearing a particular uniform changes the way you think. So they looked at the fact that participants wearing lab coats performed better on attention-related tasks. So that's interesting, but whether we could sort of generalize that, therefore wearing a school uniform will make you more studious, is a bit of a stretch. As we've already said, that kind of much more depends on other cultural
Well,
indicators
this
within
is, I mean,
schools.
yeah, I mean, if you're wearing a lab coat and that changes how you think, it's different to wearing a school uniform. Wearing a football kit probably makes you better at
Yeah.
football, but that's a correlation.
Ye-
I mean,
Well, yeah, well, it certainly wearing a football kit would probably change the way people interact with you.
yeah.
Um, that kind of thing is definitely true. And
So
the
if,
way people interact with you is likely to change your behavior in certain ways. But in terms of like, how do we, what's the best possible outfit for maximizing performance in the school? It's probably clothes that you feel really sharp in.
sharp, but this comes into different tasks throughout the school day, though, doesn't it? Because you will
Maybe.
have the point of, I mean, there are some schools near us which I see kids arriving in their PE kit because they've got PE
Yeah.
kit, they got PE
Yeah.
first thing.
Yeah.
So that saves time
Because
for
no one
getting
has a shower
changed.
these days, do they, Martin?
Well, that's the other thing, and all, but then again, they don't tend to be that strenuous. Not like in the old days, covered
I
in mud,
know.
really going for it
Exactly.
all afternoon, or whatever.
I showed my daughter. One of my daughters. We watched Kes the other day.
Ah,
The scene with the PE teacher there.
look, it's a classic. Tottenham
It's
Hotspur,
wonderful,
Manchester United,
brilliant.
Bobby Charlton.
Yeah. So she couldn't believe it. She's training to be a teacher, and she
Yeah,
thought it was great, hilarious, mad, all of
but
those things.
true. From my memory,
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, yeah, I know.
I
So
had a
yeah, so the
Keston.
evidence is pretty clear, Martin. That if you're if you have a school uniform, if you're wearing a school uniform, it's unlikely to have any impact whatsoever on anything. Certainly in isolation, as
So the
part
reasons we
of
do
a
it is
yeah,
tradition, culture. This is the way we do things here.
yeah.
It's an English thing, a British thing.
Yeah,
Um,
well, the other countries do it. Obviously, Japan, children in Japan always wear school uniforms
they also
when I
drive on
work.
the left.
Right.
Left.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Very good. Yeah, but so there are parts of the world. Someone showed me a map on social media where it was coloured in with like where in the world people wear uniform. It was that was quite. So I've visited over the years like lots of schools in Africa, and they tend to wear uniform in the African schools that I've been sub-Saharan African schools, which is interesting.
Those tend to be British ex-colonies, for example. Like, I mean,
Maybe I'm trying to think. Where have I been? I've been to Uganda, Nigeria, Malawi, Sierra Leone, which obviously not Mali, which obviously much more French. So mixture of British and French.
but then there's the British school model, which does,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
the Western model, perhaps,
It's
of
interesting the
education.
thing you said about your experience of sixth form having to wear a uniform because it's always kind of interested me that we're absolutely certain in the UK that everybody needs to wear a school uniform until they're 16, and it's relatively rare for sixth formers to have uniform. It's like we're like, oh yeah, no, let's not bother anymore.
Right. It's
Why is that? What's the logic?
I don't think there is any logic in any of this. I do think
Because
it
I've
is more
noticed,
cultural and tradition, and rather it's
yeah,
done without thought. And then
yeah,
the thought now it's because it's under challenge through a multiculturalism, through the idea of transgender students. It's become more of an issue than even it was back in the day when kids would just rebel against it. It's more of an issue now because people are having to think about how to make uniforms adaptable. These always active uniform, um,
mm,
I think, is
yeah,
a
could
one-off
be the way
thing.
forward.
So to some extent, so you don't have to get changed, and that cuts out the whole changing room fiasco that can be a nightmare sometimes, and also the
Yeah,
time it takes out of PE
yeah,
lessons and things
yeah,
like
of
that.
course, yeah, yeah,
So
for
if you've
sure.
got half an hour, 40 minutes PE lesson, and 15
I
minutes,
know.
20 minutes is getting changed,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. So I feel that we've kind of come to a bit of a consensus, Martin.
what's that? I know what
The school.
consensus means, by the way, but what?
Yeah, let me explain. It means we agree. Um, yeah, no, that we're saying maybe school uniforms aren't really the point. Do you want any final thoughts on why we should retain school uniforms?
I, I
What's your
mean,
killer argument?
I haven't got a killer argument for retaining them. I think the from a parental point of view, the fact
Yeah,
of having a
it's nice and
restriction
simple.
in the morning, this is what
Yeah,
you're going to wear, and you can't argue with me about it because your school agrees with me on this, or I agree with your school. In other words, you have to wear this. I think that is really helpful.
yes,
I think an always active uniform that isn't this huge amount of expense and
yeah, cheap.
complication throughout the
Yeah.
day is quite a simple thing, and a reduction in the amount of stuff that needs a badge on it is a good idea.
Mm.
So you can buy it from very
Cheap retailers. Yeah.
well. I try not to say cheap retailers, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, we don't want to. We want uniform to be cheap and affordable. That's what we want.
Accessible if it's going to be there. But I do think that that schools that don't have uniform, there was a time where more
Mm.
schools were dropping out of having uniform a few
In
years
the
ago.
'70s.
Oh, I think it's later than that. I think
Oh,
80s,
sorry.
90s time. I think,
Yeah, really? Okay.
but they were associated those schools with progressive
Progressivism.
ideas and
Yeah.
lack of discipline and other things. So I think in the national psyche, I don't see that returning.
No, I think you're probably right. So that being the case, the fact that we're socially comfortable with the concept of uniform It probably means it's not going to change. There isn't really much pressure from anybody for schools not to have uniform, but it should be cheap and comfortable and easy to wear. We haven't. I guess one thing we haven't talked about
Easy
is
to
that
clean.
there's
That's the other
easy to
thing.
clean.
Easy to clean
Yeah,
and put in the
yeah,
dryer.
yeah. All of that.
No, but
We
that's
haven't talked.
important.
We haven't talked about. There are some neurodivergent divergent children that struggle with wearing particular fabrics and fits. Is that something that schools should adapt to?
I think that is an issue that certainly back in the day when school uniforms were itchy, because the wool, the materials they were made out of. These
Polyester,
days,
yeah.
yeah, these days, I think schools are far more adaptable to those needs, and also the concept
Yeah.
of having that actual need
Yeah. Oh no, for
is
sure.
less of a problem. But in the old days, people wouldn't even think about that. Wear it, suffer. It's
Yeah.
good for you.
I remember, one of the old English teacher standards when you had nothing better to do was to get children to write a persuasive letter to the head teacher explaining why they shouldn't wear school uniform.
Yeah.
Kids have definitely got views on
Pupil
uniforms.
voice. Pupil voice. What are we
Pupil
going to talk
voice.
about? Let's talk about school
Yeah,
uniform.
yeah, because it's something that affects them all every day. And what I've tended to find, of course, there's lots of kids that would like to argue that they could just wear whatever they like. But on the whole, kids tend to, having read quite a lot of essays on this, they tend to think, yeah, it's probably for the best. They're not. I don't think there's a big push from most young people saying we don't. We want something else. But if you think we're wrong, and I'd certainly, it would be great if listeners, viewers could get in touch with examples of schools in England or the rest of the UK, especially secondary schools where there is no uniform. I'd really like. I don't know of any personally. Do you, Martin?
Not. No. I'm just trying
No,
to think of. Do B-Dales? Do they wear uniform at B-Dales?
I've never been. I don't know.
Right. It's a
They're
posh
more
school.
your
I've never.
alley, aren't they?
I've never been there.
Haven't you?
Never
Oh, I
been to
thought you had.
B-Dales. No, I've
I
been
thought I
there.
loved you there.
I've been there on online, so via Zoom. That's as
Right,
close
of
as I've
course.
got to B-Dales. So,
Yeah, it's as close as anyone should get to, really.
and perhaps a good deal of number of pupils tomorrow will turn up in their local school wearing their rabbit costumes.
Well, that'd be nice. I would like to think that we've had that impact. So, kids, you should all dress up, whatever that means to you. But yeah, get in touch. Let us know if we've said something you disagree with, or we haven't made a point that you think is really important. If you've got some examples of schools that deal with uniforms really, really well, or not so well, we'd love to hear.
And hit like, subscribe, give us stars, and whatever it is, follow us, all those things, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for wasting your time. Bye.
Bye-bye.